We are, as a people, inherently and historically opposed to secret society, opposed to secret oaths, opposed to secret proceedings, secret proceedings. No official of my administration, whether his rank is high or low, should interpret my words here tonight as an excuse to censor the news, to stifle dissent, to cover up our mistakes, or to withhold from the press and the public the facts they deserve to know.
Welcome to Conspiracy Corner Podcast, everyone. This is Abe, your host. It is 1 a.m., Tuesday, March 8th, 2022. As far as an update, just been off today. Was going to do some hiking, but turns out it's been storming all day, which I ain't going to lie. I don't complain with that because it's good sleeping weather. I love rain. I love storms. It's just my cup of tea. But besides that, just been working overtime, so I'm sure you haven't seen anything new come out of me here lately. Just been busy with work. But today I wanted to cover the Tuskegee Experiment, and yeah, let's get on with the show. So 40 years of human experimentation in America. The Tuskegee Experiment. The goal was to observe the natural history of untreated syphilis in black populations, but the subjects were completely unaware and were instead told they were receiving treatment for bad blood when in fact they received no treatment at all. Starting in 1932, 600 African American men from Macon County, Alabama, were enlisted to partake in a scientific experiment on syphilis. The Tuskegee study of untreated syphilis in the Negro male was conducted by the United States Public Health Service, the USPHS, and involved blood tests, x-rays, spinal taps, and autopsies of the subjects. Now, the reason I wanted to cover this was I think it's very relevant to what's going on now with people just blindly trusting their government and blindly trusting injections of things. So I just thought this was an important episode that I've been wanting to cover for a minute. So, yeah. The goal was to observe the natural history of untreated syphilis in black populations. But the subjects were unaware of this and were simply told they were receiving treatment for bad blood. Actually, they received no treatment at all. Even after penicillin was discovered as a safe and reliable cure for syphilis, the majority of men did not receive it. To really understand the heinous nature of the Tuskegee Experiment requires some societal context, a lot of history, and a realization of just how many times government agencies were given a chance to stop this human experimentation, but they did not. In 1865, the ratification of the 13th Amendment of the United States Constitution formally ended the enslavement of black Americans. But by the early 20th century, the cultural and medical landscapes of the United States was still built upon the inundated with racist concepts. Social Darwinism was rising, predicated on the survival of the fittest, and scientific racism, a pseudoscientific practice of using science to reinforce racial biases, was common. Many white people already thought themselves superior to blacks, and science and medicine was all too happy to reinforce this hierarchy. By the way, I don't know, I believe everyone's equal, but whole thing with white people thinking they're superior to blacks, have you ever tried to play basketball against a black person or a foot race? Yeah, and you're a white guy? Yeah. That's what cracks me up about neo-Nazis and shit. Like that scene on American History X when it's all white guys playing black guys. It's and the white guys win. I'm yeah, right. Okay. Before the ending of slavery, scientific racism was used to justify the African slave trade. Scientists argued that African men were uniquely fit for enslavement due to their physical strength and simple minds. They argued that slaves possessed primitive nervous systems, so did not experience pain as white people did. Wow. So that's why they beat them so much. Enslaved African Americans in the South were claimed to suffer from mental illness at rates lower than their free northern counterparts, thereby proving that enslavement was good for them. And slaves who ran away were said to be suffering from their own mental illness, known as drapetomania. And that's DRAPETO mania. Drapetomania. Whatever that is. See, drapetomania was a supposed mental illness that an 1851 American physician, Samuel A. Cartwright, hypothesized as the cause of enslaved Africans fleeing captivity. Slave life was so pleasant, the official view was that only the mentally ill would want to run away. In actuality, the desire for freedom is a natural human impulse. Well, duh. Cartwright, specifically citing the tendency to flee the plantations that held the subjects in slavery in evidence for why would slaves happy with their conditions seek to flee. To these physicians, such people had to be sick, impervious to the natural order of things, he published in an article about black slaves' illnesses and idiosyncrasies in a widely circulated Southern journal. Contemporarily reprinted in the South, Cartwright's article was wickedly mocked and satirized in the northern United States. The concept has since been debunked as pseudoscience and shown to be a part of the edifice of scientific racism. The term derives from Greek, blah, blah, blah. See, as late as 1914, the third edition of Thomas Lathrop Stedman's Practical Medical Dictionary included an entry for drapetomania, defined as vagabondage, dramania, an uncontrollable or insane impulsion to wander. So there you have it. That's kind of crazy. During and after the American Civil War, African Americans were urged to be a different species from white Americans, and mixed-race children were presumed prone to many medical issues. Doctors of the time testified that the emancipation of slaves had caused the mental, moral, and physical deterioration of the black population. Observing that virtually free of disease as slaves, they were now overwhelmed by it. Many believed that the African Americans were doomed to extinction, and arguments were made about their physiology being unsuited for the colder climates of America. Thus, they should be returned to Africa. Scientific and medical authorities of the late 19th and 20th centuries held extremely harmful pseudoscientific ideas, specifically about the sex drives and genitals of African Americans. It was widely believed that while the brains of African Americans were under-evolved, their genders were overdeveloped. Black men were seen to have intrinsic perversion for white women, and all African Americans were seen as inherently immoral, with insatiable sexual appetites. This all matters because it was with these three understandings of race, sexuality, and health that researchers undertook the Tuskegee study. They believe, largely due to their fundamentally flawed scientific understandings of race, that black people were extremely prone to sexually transmitted infections, like syphilis. Low birth rates and high miscarriage rates were universally blamed on STIs. They also believed that all black people, regardless of their education, background, economic, or personal situations, could not be convinced to get treatment for syphilis. Thus, the USPHS could justify the Tuskegee study, calling it a study in nature rather than an experiment, meant to simply observe the natural progression of syphilis within a community that wouldn't seek treatment. The USPHS set their study in Macon County due to estimates that 35% of its population was infected with syphilis. In 1932, the initial patients between the ages of 25 and 60 were recruited. Under the guise of receiving free medical care for bad blood, a colloquial term encompassing anemia, syphilis, fatigue, and other conditions, told that the treatment would last only 6 months. They received physical examinations, x-rays, spinal taps, and when they died, autopsies. Researchers faced a lack of participants due to fears that the physical examinations were actually for the purpose of recruiting them to the military. To assuage these fears, the doctors began examining women and children as well. Wow, that's even darker. Men diagnosed with syphilis who were of the appropriate age were recruited for the study, while others received proper treatments for their syphilis. At the time of these were commonly mercury or arsenic-containing medicines. Mercury, by the way, you can't get that shit out. You can't sweat it out. You can't piss it out. You can't spit it out. Like, once it's in, is from what I've heard. And, like, the main side effect of mercury is, like, insanity. Hence the whole Mad Hatters, they used mercury to make hats, and people back in the day were wondering why all these hatters were going insane, and it was because of mercury. In 1933, researchers decided to continue the study long term. They recruited 200 plus control patients who do not have syphilis, simply switching them to the syphilis positive group if at any time they developed it. They also began giving all the patients ineffective medicines, ointments or capsules with 2 small doses of neoarsephenamine or mercury to further their belief that they were being treated. As time progressed, however, patients began to stop attending their appointments. To greater incentivize them to remain a part of the study, the USPHS hired a nurse named Eunice Rivers to drive them to and from their appointments, provide them with hot meals, and deliver their medicines, services especially valuable to subjects during the Great Depression. In an effort to ensure the autopsies of their test subjects, the researchers also began covering patients' funeral expenses. So there you go. Oh, we'll kill you and then we'll just cover your funeral expense. Sound fair? Multiple times throughout the experiment, researchers actively worked to ensure that their subjects did not receive treatment for syphilis. In 1934, they provided doctors in Macon County with lists of their subjects and asked them not to treat them. In 1940, they did the same with the Alabama Health Department. In 1941, many of the men were drafted and had their syphilis uncovered by the entrance medical exam. So the researchers had the men removed from the Army, rather than let their syphilis be treated. That's fucked up. It was in these moments that the Tuskegee study's true nature became clear. Rather than simply observing and documenting the natural progression of syphilis in the community, as had been planned, the researchers intervened, first by telling the participants that they were being treated, a lie, and then again by preventing their participants from seeking treatment that could save their lives. Thus the original basis for the study, that the people of Macon County would likely not seek treatment and thus could be observed as their syphilis progressed, becoming a self-fulfilling prophecy. The Henderson Act was passed in 1943, requiring tests and treatments for venereal diseases to be publicly funded. By 1947, penicillin had become the standard treatment for syphilis, prompting the USPHS to open several rapid treatment centers specifically to treat syphilis with penicillin. All the while, they were actively preventing 399 men from receiving the same treatments. By 1952, however, about 30% of the participants had received penicillin anyway. Despite the researchers' best efforts, regardless, the USPHS argued that their participants would seek penicillin or stick to the prescribed treatment plans. They claimed that the participants, all black men, were too stoic to visit a doctor. In truth, these men thought that they were already being treated, so why would they seek any further treatment? The researchers' tune changed again as time went on. In 1965, they argued that it was too late to give the subjects penicillin, as their syphilis had progressed too far for the drug to help. While a convenient justification for their continuation of the study, penicillin is and was recommended for all stages of syphilis and could have stopped the disease's progression in the patients. In 1947, the Nuremberg Code was written, which, by the way, we covered that. We did an episode on that, so I'll leave it in the links. If you're watching on YouTube, you can check it out. In 1947, the Nuremberg Code was written. In 1964, the World Health Organization published their Declaration of Helsinki. Both aimed to protect humans from experimentation, but despite this, the Centers for Disease Control, the CDC, which had taken over the USPHS and controlling the study, actively decided to continue the study as late as 1969. So I wanted to kind of dive into the Declaration of Helsinki. The Declaration of Helsinki is a set of ethical principles regarding human experimentation developed originally in 1964 for the medical community by the World Medical Association, the WMA. It is widely regarded as the cornerstone document on human research ethics. It is not legally binding. It is not a legally binding instrument under the international law, but instead draws its authority from the degree to which it has been codified in or influenced national and regional legislation and regulations. Its role was described by a Brazilian forum in 2000 in these words, quote, "Even though the Declaration of Helsinki is the responsibility of the World Medical Association, the document should be considered the property of all humanity." Now these are the principles. The Declaration is morally binding on physicians, and that obligation overrides any national or local laws or regulations. If the Declaration provides for a higher standard of protection of humans than the latter, investigators still have to abide by local legislations but will be held to the higher standard. The basic principles of this are: the fundamental principle is respect for the individual, Article 8, his or her right to self-determination, and the right to make informed decisions. under Article 20, 21, and 22 regarding participation in research, both initially and during the course of the research. The investigator's duty is solely to the patient, Articles 2, 3, and 10, or volunteer, Articles 16 and 18. And while there is always a need for research, Article 6, the participants' welfare must always take precedence over the interest of science and society, Article 5. And ethical considerations must always take precedence over laws and regulations, Article 6. The recognition of the increased vulnerability of individuals and groups calls for special vigilance, Article 8. It is recognized that when the research participant is incompetent, physically or mentally capable of giving consent, or is a minor, Articles 23 and 24, then allowance should be considered for surrogate consent by an individual acting in the participant's best interest, although his or her consent should be obtained, if at all possible, Article 25. Operational principles. Research should be based on a thorough knowledge of the scientific background, Article 11. Careful assessment of risk and benefits, Article 16 and 17. Have a reasonable likelihood of benefit to the population studied, Article 19, and be conducted by suitably trained investigators, Article 15, using approved protocols subject to independent ethical review and oversight by a properly convened committee, Article 13. The protocol should address the ethical issues and indicate that it is in compliance with the Declaration, Article 14. Studies should be discontinued if the available information indicates that the original considerations are no longer satisfied, Article 17. Information regarding the study should be publicly available, Article 16. Ethical principles extend to their publication of the results and consideration of any potential conflict of interest, Article 27. Experimental investigations should always be compared against the best methods, but under certain circumstances, a placebo or no treatment group may be utilized, Article 29. The interest of the participant after the study is completed should be part of the overall ethical assessment, including assuring their access to the best proven care, Article 30. Wherever possible, unproven methods should be tested in the context of research where there is reasonable belief of possible benefit, Article 32. Now, these are additional guidelines or regulations. Investigators often find themselves in positions of having to follow several different codes or guidelines and are therefore required to understand the differences between them. One of these is Good Clinical Practice, which is GCP, an international guide, while each country may also have local regulations such as the Common Rule in the United States. In addition to these requirements of the FDA, Office for Human Research Protections, OHRP, in that country, there are a number of available tools which compare these. Other countries have guides with similar roles, such as the Tri-Council Policy Statement in Canada. Additional international guidelines include those of CIOMS, Knollfield Council, and UNESCO. So, back to this. In 1947, the Nuremberg Code was written, and in 1964, the World Health Organization published their Declaration of Helsinki. Both aim to protect humans from experimentation. But despite this, the Centers for Disease Control, which had taken over from the USPHS and controlling the study, actively decided to continue the study as late as 1969. It wasn't until a whistleblower, Peter Buxton leaked information about the study to the New York Times, and the paper published it on the front page on November 16, 1972. Man, that would be cool to have that paper. That the Tuskegee study finally ended. By this time, only 74 of the test subjects were still alive. 128 patients had died of syphilis or its complications. 40 of their wives had been infected, and 19 of their children had acquired congenital syphilis. There was a mass public outrage, and the National Association for the Advancement of Colored People launched a class action lawsuit against the USPHS. It settled the suit 2 years later for $10 million and agreed to pay the medical treatments of all surviving participants and infected family members, the last of whom died in 2009. Largely in response to the Tuskegee study, Congress passed the National Research Act in 1974, and the Office for Human Research Protections was established within the USPHS. Obtaining informed consent from all study participants became required for all research on humans. With this process overseen by institutional review boards, IRBs for short, within academia and hospital. The Tuskegee study has had lasting effects on America. It's estimated that the life expectancy of black men fell by up to 1.4 years when the study's details came to light. Many also blame the study for impacting the willingness of black individuals to willingly participate in medical research today. We know all about the evil Nazis who experimented on prisoners. We condemn the scientists in Marvel movies who carry out tests on prisoners of war. But we do well to remember that America has also used its own people as lab rats. Yet to this day, no one has been prosecuted for their role in dooming 399 men to syphilis. Well, thank you all for tuning in. I just really wanted to cover the Tuskegee Experiment. I've been wanting to cover it for a long time, and I think it's a very important time in our history with everything that's going on that this should be brought up again, and this should be taught again. I hope this was entertaining, but I do hope that this taught you something if you didn't know anything about it or knew a little bit and wanted to learn more about it, because I think this is very important and should not be forgotten, especially during this time. But if you are listening to us in audio format only, you can check us out on YouTube. The profile picture is a bunny rabbit with a samurai sword. The profile name is Conspiracy Corner Podcast. That way you can kind of put a face to a voice. We do other videos every now and then besides podcast. But if you want to listen to us on audio format only, because some people do like to do that because it saves their phone battery, goes into sleep mode, you can check us out on Breaker, Google Podcasts, Radio Public, Spotify, and Anchor. And once again, thank you all for tuning in. Please like, share, and subscribe. And if you are listening to us on Spotify or something like that, please rate us. Give us a 5-star. Give us a review if you want. And you all have an awesome day.
We are, as a people, inherently and historically opposed to secret society, opposed to secret oaths, opposed to secret proceedings, secret proceedings. No official of my administration, whether his rank is high or low, should interpret my words here tonight as an excuse to censor the news, to stifle dissent, to cover up our mistakes. withhold from the press and the public the facts they deserve to know.